Steve wandered past the backyard, past the cow watering tank where his brother had died, past the milking shed, and into the large garden. He trotted up to his daddy and asked, "Can I have some candy? I want candy." Joe bent down, pulled up a tough weed, and kept scraping away smaller weeds in the watering furrow of his hoe. "No, no candy," he replied simply. Steve frowned and tried again. "Why not?" "I want some candy, Daddy." Joe growled down at his tiny son. "Yeah, people in hell want ice water." Steve stood frowning, watching his dad stalk away. What is hell? He thought. One day Rosie took her two boys in the old Studebaker sedan and drove to see her third closest neighbors 10 miles away. Visiting is what Rosie called it. They arrived at the Johnsons' ranch just before noon. Billy Johnson came out of the back door of a nice small house surrounded with corrals. She met them in the gravel parking lot. "Well, hello, Rosie. Come to visit, have you? I see your boys are growing up fast as tumbleweeds. Come in, Billy effused. On the way to the back door, a golden-haired puppy ran up and jumped on all of them. He excitedly barked and licked the boys' faces. Steve instantly fell in love with the dog. He stayed out in the yard and played with the puppy while the others chatted in the house. He only went into the house when his mother demanded that he come in and eat this nice lunch Billy has gone and made for us. He felt as though he was abandoning his new friend, but obeyed and went in to scarf the food down as quickly as he could. Billy said, "Rosie, if you'll let me, I'll give that pup to Steve. Bud and I have been talking about what to do with him. We've already got 3. That's enough dogs for any ranch. Will you take him off our hands?" Rosie looked out the window, watching Steve running in circles, chasing the puppy and looking happier than she had seen him in a while. She considered for a moment. "Oh, Swanee, I think it's a great idea. But Joe is another matter. He claims to hate dogs, but I think I can talk him into it. Sure, let Steve have the dog and we'll make it work out somehow." So they arrived back home at the Droke place with the dog. Joe was not happy to see it. He told Rosie to get rid of it. She refused. The next day, while riding their horses north of the Droke place, moving a few head of cattle, Joe mentioned the new dog situation to Henry James. "Rosie doesn't listen to a single word I say. I told her a long time ago, no dogs," he complained to Henry. "Well, it seems to me dogs around here often come up missing, don't they? Joe, a coyote or a cougar gets 'em. Hell, Tippy got bitten by a rattler last year and nearly died. Just coax him away from the house and take care of the situation." Joe did that the next day. While his family slept in until their usual 6:30, he got up at 5 and saddled his horse. Then he leashed the dog and walked up the trail, leading the horse with one hand and the dog with the other. About a mile from the ranch house, Joe stopped and tied the puppy up to a juniper scrub. Then he led the horse 100 feet away and tied it up. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard tied to his saddle. He walked several paces from the horse, raised the rifle, and shot the dog once through the head. He dumped the dead dog in the arroyo nearby. Later in the day, when he told Henry, he laughed and said, "Well, so much for your old lady ignoring what you say." Rosie drove as quickly as she dared in the Studebaker, fighting the steering wheel with both hands as she drove down the rutted dirt road that connected their canyon ranch lands with the thin ribbon of oiled gravel road that led to Trinidad, Colorado. She could barely keep a pace of about 40 miles an hour because of the deep ruts made by trucks slogging through the mud when it had last rained. Steve and Clyde sat beside her on the front bench seat. It was a very hot, dusty, parched August day in 1964. Rosie slowed down and gasped a little. "Hoo boy, here comes that old Riney woman, driving like a bat out of hell down the middle of the road. I sure hope she'll get over before she hits us." Steve hopped up and put his feet on the top front of the seat so he could stretch up and lean against the top of the dashboard, looking down the road through the grimy windshield. "You know her, Mama?" he inquired. Rosie glanced over and pushed Steve back onto the bench seat. She pulled over as far as she could to the right side of the narrow country road and stopped. "Sit down. Now, boys, don't you say nothing, and stay in the car. Maybe she'll just drive on by," she warned them. The old rusty rattletrap of a vehicle skidded to a scratchy stop exactly beside them, and the noisy, crackling engine died noisily. It was a rusted-out 1938 Chevy pickup truck. Steve looked past his mother as she looked out and greeted the driver. He had never seen anyone like this before. He felt instantly afraid. Then he wondered why his mother had anticipated a woman in the truck, because to him the driver looked like a man who'd been sitting in the Saturday night washtub for far too long, and then was kept out in the sun until he looked like a roasted raisin with beady, deeply sunken gray eyes, a fire hydrant of a nose, and dark brown broken teeth. The creature stuck its head out of the cab and leaned down, squinting at Rosie and the boys. "Hey there, is that you, young Rosie? Gone to town, eh?" "Well, hello, Miss Riney. Fancy meeting you out here on the road." "Hell, girl, you know there's nothing fancy about me. You might run into me down in this road almost any time, day or night. Can't fucking remember the last time I drove into town, though. Shit, it sure is hot, ain't it? Why, it's drier than a popcorn fart." Then Riney spat a big, wet, brown wad of chewing tobacco in the dirt between them. "Well, it sure is hot, I'll tell you what," was all Rosie could muster. "You know, Stella done run off a couple of weeks back, so now I's gots to raise these goats on my own lonesome again. Damn fucking little bitch." "Please, Miss Riney, don't cuss so much in front of my boys. I am sorry to hear you lost your friend Stella, though. I know you were real good friends." "Ah, hell, woman. You know that they heerd their pop say worse'n me. I speak my mind, which is nothing delicate. And I know you know that for fucking sure." She paused for a while and looked down the road in front of her. Then, while still staring down the road, she said quietly, "And sure as shootin', I know you knowed she was more than just my friend." She leaned out of the cab a little farther and peered at the boys. "You mindin' your mama, boys?" she demanded. Clyde cringed as she stared at him from the ancient leathery face and slunk down onto the floorboard. Steve quickly dropped down with him. Miss Riney pulled her head back into the cab of the truck and picked up a pistol that looked broken, with the wood from the handle busted out and a rusty barrel. She waved in the air with her right hand. "Well, I tell you, damned old coyote got to my chickens last night. Killed 2 of 'em, and I'm out here looking to put an end to that particular shit doggy. Have you seen any such beast around up in here?" Miss Riney asked. Rosie shook her head and replied, No, I can't say as I have seen any coyotes, Miss Riney. Sorry to hear about your chickens, though. I hope you get that coyote." "Ah, well, it's a damn sight more about keeping busy. Keeps my mind off'n at Stella." "Well, you take good care of the boys. I'll be seeing you," Miss Riney said quietly. Without another word, she fired up her old truck and drove away. Many years later, when Steve remembered this encounter, he realized that the old woman lived as a man. It was she that was sometimes described and cussed and discussed in conversations about an old witch lady that owned her own goat farm and was rumored to do wicked things in her house with other women. She was the first feisty lesbian woman he had ever met. As an adult, he could infer many, many years of harsh survival the woman had endured on the high plains, a unique and admirable character that seemed like an aberration from the 19th century, and who had actually been born in the 19th century. Driving to the Groden Ranch headquarters the next summer, Rosie warned her 2 boys to behave themselves during the visit. She did not feel welcome by the Grodens anymore, so she spent all morning getting her makeup on and ironing a summer dress. She visited with Sally and Helena Groden, while Steve and Clyde played with their cousins, Sally's sons. They played hide-and-seek all afternoon. Steve found that he could hide so well that the other kids could never find him. He crawled under a huge sandstone table dubbed the Flintstones table by the Grodens, and curled up into the angle formed by the 2 massive slabs that formed one support end of the foot-thick tabletop and braced himself up in there. After a long while he heard the others calling for him frantically. It made him feel powerful and safe to be able to hide so well. Some time later he heard his mother's shrill wail in the distance. She was out in the cattle corrals searching for him. Up to this point, he was excited about the game and proud about how well he played it. Now began a deep, gnawing fear of being whipped by his mother. Hours passed. As the last rays of the setting sun cast long shadows from the table, he formed a desperate plan. He would sneak into the house and pretend he had just been overlooked, somehow. He crawled out from under the table and scanned his surroundings. His body was sore and stiff from sitting still for so long. He opened the front screen door as quietly as he could and let himself into the house. His brother and the two Groden boys were all sitting rigidly on the couch in the living room. They looked frightened. Ted Groden stared at Steve with his mouth wide open. He said, "Steve, your mama thinks you're lost. All the grown-ups are out looking for you. Where were you anyway?" Steve did not want to give away his wonderful hiding place, so he just replied, "I hid real good, didn't I?" Randy was Ted's younger brother. He looked astonished at Steve and said, "We stopped hiding and seeking a long time ago. We was hollering for you. Your mama is real mad." Steve sat with the other boys on the couch, tired and afraid. The Groden brothers' grandmother, Helena, came into the room. She rushed over to Steve and bent down to look at him. "Steve, where have you been? We've looked everywhere for you. Your mother is worried sick. Come on, we better let everyone know you're okay," she said slightly breathlessly as she led him out to the backyard. "Rosie! Rosie! We found him. He's right here. He's all right," she called towards the corrals. She bent down to Steve again and asked, "Where were you all this time? Were you still playing hide and seek?" Steve looked up into her kindly face and replied, "I was hiding under the Flintstones table. I'm sorry." He began to cry, and she hugged him to her leg and let him cry. In a few minutes Rosie came from the corrals at a fast walk. Her face was red, and she was whacking at the air with a long green lilac switch. She visibly shook with rage as she approached Helena and Steve. Her voice came out in ragged falsetto as she screeched at Steve. "Boy, I'm gonna whip your ass till you can't sit down for a week! Damn you, I've been looking and calling for you for the last 2 hours!" She vented as she paced towards the two. Helena held out a warding hand as Steve hid behind her, clinging to her legs in terror. "Now, just hold on there, Rosie," she said in a stern voice. "I know you're angry, but you are not going to whip Steve. He was just playing hide and seek and got a little carried away is all. He's tired and scared. He didn't know you were looking for him," she explained. Steve's mother held the switch in the air and yelled, "You better give him to me this second, Helena, and stop trying to protect him. He's earned a whipping, and he's damn sure going to get it." Helena's voice became cool and rock steady as she stared Rosie down and said, "No, you are not whipping this boy for simply acting like a child. You are going to settle down before you even talk to him. Now you go off and cool down somewhere before you come back. I'm going to take Steve in the house and get him something to eat. You can come in after you've calmed down." With that, she turned around, picked Steve up, and carried him into the house. It was one of the handful of times in Steve's childhood when someone stood up and advocated for him. Perhaps this is the main reason Steve loved Great Aunt Helena deeper than he could verbalize. When he was 8 years old, his parents informed him that she had died. Steve cried and cried. She was the first hero he had ever met. In the spring of 1966, Steve played in the dirt with his younger brother. Their mother was boiling a strange green broth over a fire in the backyard incinerator. She was scooping some of the ashes into the goopy mixture. Steve knew that she would somehow transform the liquid into hard, dark green bars of lye soap. His mother used these caustic soap bars to wash their clothes in the wringer washer. She stood up and used a potholder to pick up the boiling bucket. After carrying it to the side of the house, she poured it into little pans that served as bar molds. Next, she went into the house and gathered all the garbage up and carried it out to the incinerator. She dumped it in a heap on the flames and stoked the coals with a stick. Steve and Clyde ran over to watch the flames leap up the sides of the paper bags and see the plastic containers shrivel up and melt away in the flames. Rosie told her sons to stay away from the pit while the garbage burned. "Those old hairspray cans are going to blow up, and you might get hurt. You stay away from the fire now," she admonished them. Steve stood several yards away and watched the fire. Every few minutes he heard a loud popping sound erupt from the garbage and saw ashes fly all around the incinerator, hairspray cans exploding. The next day Steve was playing in the dirt next to the family Studebaker. He started looking up into the pure, cloudless blue of the sky. He noticed something odd almost directly overhead. There were no clouds, except for one very tiny one that moved slowly from west to east. It was so far away that Steve could barely make out its round shape. He was intrigued by this far apparition. He wished he could see it better. He remembered his father's hunting spotting scope that he used for hunting. It was a small gray telescope with a little fold-out tripod on the bottom. Steve lugged it out to the hood of the car and set it up. By standing on his tiptoes, he could tilt it up just enough to point it at the white blob high overhead. After a long time of turning the focus knob back and forth and scanning all around the sky, he finally caught a glimpse of his object. It was almost perfectly round and shiny. Steve became very excited. Something hung down from it. It was a strange-shaped white box. He put down the scope and excitedly ran into the house. "Mama, Mama, come see the thing I saw! Come see the thing I saw way up high!" he yelled excitedly. His mother replied, "Don't you break your daddy's spotting scope. Did you really see something in the sky?" "Yes, it's way up there," Steve breathlessly reported. His mother was busy sewing something, so she said, "I think you're pulling my leg. I'm pretty busy right now, Steve. I wouldn't know how to use that crazy spotting scope anyway." That night at dinner, his mother told his father about the aerial discovery. "Oh, it was probably a weather balloon," Joe explained. Joe said he had found one in a pasture once. The balloon itself was shredded, but the instrument package was still intact. He gave Steve strict instructions to never touch his spotting scope again. Steve went to bed dreaming of discovering a downed weather balloon. Curtis Groden was Joe's boss. He owned the cattle ranch, part of which was the drove place. The boys were always happy to see old Curtis. He talked kindly to them, and he nearly always pulled candy out of his pockets for them. This was a commodity the boys rarely received. In the spring of 1965, Rosie placed Steve on the school bus to Kim, Colorado. The bus took him 35 miles to kindergarten. He quickly became afraid. He had never been away from the ranch by himself before. Of all the other children and adults he met, he only knew Randy Groden. He paid attention and worked hard to conform to this new requirement, but he always looked forward to the bus to take him back to the drove place, the only place he felt secure.